on today's Story Beat.
Always start with something complimentary. Always find something in the script or the material that you can say, like, hey, I really love this character, or like, that's a really cool concept I've never seen before. Because it's just, we're all creatives. We all take things personally, even though they say not to. And it's hard. It's hard when people don't just say, like, what you wrote is like, this is the best thing ever, especially if you think, man, I knocked this out of the park. It's great. But then just, be constructive. There's never a reason to be mean to somebody and say, like, oh, this is crap, or like, I'd never watch this. It's just kind of like, hey, look, this is how you could make this better, or there's some suggestions, or have you really thought about why this person's doing this the way that they are, or what are some other options.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, writer, director, producer Amanda Raymond, is a New York transplant living in Los Angeles. Amanda wrote, produced, and directed the feature films You Are My Home with Alyssa Milano, which can currently be found on Netflix, and My Favorite Girlfriend that Saban Films released in the summer of 2022 for a limited theatrical run. Amanda also wrote, directed, and produced the award-winning short film noir thriller From Emily that was on the reduced list for Oscar consideration in 2020. Amanda's first novel, Son of Sherlock, was published in 2017, and she's currently at work on the sequel to it. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great thrill for me to welcome the brilliant, prolific, multi-talented Amanda Raymond to StoryBeat today. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, the pleasure, trust me, is all mine. So let's go back in your history just a little bit. You've been at the writing and directing game now for a little while. It's not like you just started yesterday. But I'm wondering, at what age were you when you first started to think about performing and the arts and being in movies and TV and writing?
Oh gosh, I mean, since I was a little kid, I was always writing and crafting little scenes and scenarios for my friends. Like, when we would, play pretend when you're kids, and it's like the playing house was always so boring to me. I'm like, no, there's gotta be like an adventure and like a dragon and like a princess and something fun and exciting. It was always more my MO. I went into acting before I got into directing, and as an actor, I loved the movie Beauty and the Beast. It is still to this day my favorite movie of all time, the animated one.
The animated one.
Yeah. And a friend of mine said, oh, there's auditions for Beauty and the Beast and you should go audition. I'm like, I'm not an actor. I don't do that thing. It's like, it's your favorite movie. So I got conned into going to the auditions, and I ended up getting the role of Belle. And then the acting bug bit me, and I was like, this is amazing. I love this. So I always say I'm an actor's director because I understand and came from the acting world. And, I know how to work with them and what their motivation is, and to really work deeper with them on character than just like work from point A to point B. And I can understand why they need a type of motivation as to, well, why am I doing this?
Do you think that you approach the writing of whatever you've written, whether it's a novel or a screenplay, from an actor's perspective? Do you think about the character as it would be performed?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm even writing the book and when writing screenplays, I always act everything out. I'll go through and I'll read it out loud and I'll act out every single character. I'm like, is this interesting? Oh, that character probably wouldn't say that. Or this feels more like this should be this character's line. So I definitely still use all of that in my writing.
And you find that's very helpful, I assume, because then
Yes.
you can flesh it out in a way where you can feel it.
Exactly. Like I cry, I get upset, I stomp around. I definitely get into each one of the characters. And when I'm writing a character, it's like there are no small roles, only small actors, as they always say. And it's like each character has to have a personality and a backstory and a background. Is like, why are they there in the story at this particular moment in their life?
Do you think that there was a time when you thought to yourself, you know what, I am actually pretty good at this? Did you go through some form of training and then come out of that training and know you were fairly good at this?
Not for directing. For acting, I did like a lot of summer stock theater. When I was back in Syracuse, New York, I always did dinner theater, children's theater, musical theater, in the area. I did like little, bit parts in commercials and stuff since I was a teenager. And even then I was like, wow, this is great. You get paid a lot of money to hang out for a couple hours. That's pretty nice.
Do you like
yeah.
the interaction between you and other actors? And especially, well, you get it from two perspectives, one as an actor and the other as a director. Do you like that interaction?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's my favorite thing is really working with actors and talking about story. And I always tell actors, I say, by the time, we're on set or we're in rehearsal, you now know these characters better than I do because you've taken the time, you understand them, you've created their backstory. And so when they say to me, hey, I kind of think they would say the line more this way, or like, what would you think if I tried something crazy? I did like X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. So I really, really liked a collaborative environment with my actors.
And that give and take, I think probably, if I'm guessing right, comes from having been there yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Do you think of yourself primarily as a writer or as an actor? What do you think of yourself as being mostly?
A director.
A director.
Yeah. I mean, I love writing and I love doing that, but I don't have to just direct my own projects. I have been given scripts and then I'll do my director's pass or I'll give notes to the writer and I really enjoy both of those things. So I wouldn't say I'm just, a writer or just primarily a director. I think directing is for me, I get to encompass everything that I love. I get to incorporate acting, I get to incorporate writing, I love production design. I love costumes. I used to cosplay all the time and go to Comic-Con and dress up. So all those different elements of each of the departments, I get to play in all of them. So to me, that's just the perfect world.
Well, it's all about storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all play acting and going into the fantasies in your head and hopefully the heads of other people who will enjoy what you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So do you find yourself writing all the time? Do you find yourself conjuring stories in your head all the time?
Yeah, it's you'll be on like the subway or you'll be, hanging out with a friend or something. And it's like, what would be a really fun idea? Like, wouldn't it be cool if, like, yeah, I should write that. So it just, ideas are always kind of just like filtering around in, the air that you're pulling out. And sometimes you write some down and turns into something, or sometimes you don't. Like even My Favorite Girlfriend, my most recent film, it was literally just on a scrap of paper. I just was sitting there one day and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if this guy thought he had the perfect girlfriend because she had a bunch of different personalities and like she's like a different girl every night. And it's just like, he's dating all these different women, but he's really not. And so that idea was kind of springboarded from there. And I was looking for someone's email and I'd forgotten I'd written that down. And then I came back to a bunch of pieces of paper. I was like, hey, I should do something with this.
And obviously you did.
And I did. Yeah.
And that's the one that's recently released as we're recording the show.
Yes? Correct. Yes.
Because we're recording the show toward the end of the summer in 2022, and it was out in this particular summer. Yeah.
Yeah, it came out August 5th. It was a limited theatrical release, and then it came out on streamers. It's on like Vudu Fandango. It's on Apple TV. It's on Amazon Prime. Pretty much anywhere you can download and stream a film, it's currently available. Nice.
All right. So you sort of pitched the idea to us already by saying it's about a guy who falls in love with a woman who is multiple personalities. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. That was just the initial kernel of an idea, but what it ended up turning into is that Conrad is a man that suffers from OCD, but is in denial about it. And he ends up meeting Molly et al., the different alters, who has dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, as it used to be called. And then through the process of learning about her disorders and realizing, that he wants to try to get her help, he has to look at his own demons and the issues that he's having that's holding him back in life.
And how long did it take you to write the script?
I wrote the outline in one day. I had it approved by my producer, my investor, and my manager. And then I wrote the initial draft in 4.5 days.
4.5 days.
It was one of those things that just the story just came out. I normally write fast, not that fast, but obviously that it went to different drafts and iterations and such. But the initial, I just was nose to the grind, nose to the computer, and I just wrote it out, and it was just there. The story was just there.
It just poured out of you then, yeah?
Yeah. I didn't do much of anything else for those days, but I was like, everyone will go away.
Well, 4.5 days is it's not even a vacation. Did you outline first?
I did. Took about a day and I did an outline for the story. And even with the outline, that only took me a day. Like I just knew what the story was. It was just really waiting to be told.
And then after that draft, how many drafts did you actually go through before it wound up going into production?
I would say probably about 6 different drafts, because I had one and then my producers read it. Then I had some notes. I had a consultant on it as a therapist who helped me with the therapy element of it all and the accuracy. And then I also had a consultant who actually has DID, and it got to them. It went to pass with them in terms of the terminology, in terms of like how it actually functions. And they explained to me when someone is switching, when they have DID, it's like what we call in film like a push pull. It's like, the change in the sound, the environment, and just kind of like everything kind of shifts a little bit. And I was like, that's actually really helpful and to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So for each different consultant, I kind of had to do a new pass and a new draft. We did a table read, and then notes came out from the table read. And then, we sat down and did rehearsals. Some notes came out of the rehearsals with my actors before we had the shooting script.
And did you do, aside from having the consultant, did you do research as well?
Yes. Yep. I definitely did a lot of online research. I watched a lot of videos. There are a lot of online presences on like TikTok or YouTube or what have you that have it. And a lot of them are really good about going to explaining it. And then my consultant actually had treated it for 32 years. And he was very, very helpful.
And you then needed to translate that, as we all do if we're trying to be commercial about our work, which you're obviously trying to be commercial about it. You're trying to sell it and sell it to the public. You then had to find a way to make it then entertaining and not just some treatise on the disease itself, right?
Oh, of course. Yes, there's definitely lots of jokes in there. And at first, the guy is like, oh, she's the girl next door. She's a rock star. She's, it's like, this is fun. And he just kind of, every time it's like, hi, I'm Conrad. Hi, I'm Conrad. And a little like 51st dates-ish, because each alter doesn't remember meeting him as the other alter.
Right. That then turns into one series of setups and jokes and payoffs, as they say, setups and payoffs along the way.
Yeah. And we really wanted to handle it with truth and authenticity. I didn't put anything in there that was ever making fun of the disease or the disorder or anybody that suffers from it. I was really trying to be true to what it is like to actually have that. But, comedy kind of comes out of anything, and I know that the consultant was very happy with a lot of the changes that I made, and that, he's like, I love that it's a love story, because so often people that have multiple personalities are created as the villain. They're like a Jekyll and Hyde. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Something I know a little about. Yeah.
But what they told me, it's they, because I think there's 26 alters at the moment, is that, who you are at your core is not going to fundamentally change just because you're switching. It's like, if you're a good human, you're not going to suddenly turn into a serial killer. Like that's just not how that works. It's an offshoot of who you are at your core.
And would that apply to someone who was a very funny person at their core? They would remain a funny person in all those different alters?
Not necessarily. They could be, elements of comedy. I know like one alter, the A system was our consultant. That's the name of their system. One is very kind of shy, and the other one's kind of spunky, and the other one's kind of more gruff about certain things. And it's really fascinating. But there are elements that you see tied in between all of them.
And did you sit down when you were writing the outline, obviously before you wrote the script, did you sit down and think to yourself many different scenarios with different characters? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, I just kind of thought, I'm like, okay, how many do I want to bring into this? Because, you think Faces of Eve, there's 3, or, certain stories you read, okay, there's like anywhere from, 2 to 3 to 100 different alters. I'm like, I don't want to go crazy. I don't want my actress to go crazy. So, what seems like a good number? I said, okay, probably about 5 or 6. And then from there, I just kind of went with different people that I know. And those are kind of the different alters. Like one of my friends actually is a rock musician. One person is an influencer. And so I really use them as like the basis of each alter, and then just kind of embellished it from there.
Do you find it's easier to pull your character work from people that you know?
I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's helpful because I have a very clear picture of them in my head. Or if I'm writing it for a specific actor, that's always helpful because you have their voice in your head and you think, oh, this is how, it's how Robert Downey would say it, or this is how Steve Carell would say it, or you just have different thoughts on that.
What for you makes a good story good?
For me, a good story good. It's relatable characters that have flaws. Because nobody's perfect. And I think the flaws in each character is what really makes them interesting. and you think, oh, this character has ADD, this character has persecution issues, this character, it's like, oh man, I feel that way sometimes. And the relatability with characters and then putting them in worlds and scenarios is, that's what makes a good story to me. It doesn't have to have a crazy plot of explosions and things, blowing up, or a fantastical world of fairies. It's just like, are these people that are interesting, engaging, and I want to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with?
I'm trying to get a handle in my head on your sort of themes throughout your career so far. You obviously wrote a book about a detective, female detective, right? And do you say that you think that way as a detective in your work, that you're always trying to figure out how things work one step after another? Or do you think of yourself as a comedy writer, or do you think of yourself as a dramatic writer, or are you all the above?
I'd say I'm all of the above, because people always like to say, they want to pigeonhole you and say, oh, you're just a comedy writer, you're just a drama writer. But I think for me as an actor initially, I like to do all of it. I like to, my last film was a dramedy, My Favorite Girlfriend. The one I'm currently working on for an actor is also a dramedy. But I also have a thriller. My short film was a thriller, and I have a feature script based on the short. And then I have like an animated dark fantasy that I've written. So I wouldn't say like I'm not scattered and all over the map, but I'm into so many different things.
And do you find that makes it difficult for you to sell yourself, or does it not matter today?
I think at this point, I don't know if it matters as much. I think if I was just a TV writer and I was a drama TV writer, it'd be really, really hard to sell me as a comedy writer. So everyone's like, oh, that's what you're known for. But I think as I'm still building and growing my list of credits, I think I'm still free, and that's what I want to do, is explore different things. So it's like, oh, she has done horror, she has done comedy, she has done drama.
You have so far avoided being pigeonholed.
I hope so.
Well, it sounds like you have, since you do all these different things and you're doing them successfully. So that's a good sign. That means you will certainly have the freedom to point to those that want to pigeonhole you. You'll have the freedom to say, no, here's what else I'm able to do, and here's the success I've had with it. So I think it's important, if you don't want to be pigeonholed, that you do what you do. I'm saying that for those who are trying to figure out how to have a career. Sometimes people want to be pigeonholed. You don't.
Right. Like some people just want to be the horror director, and that's all they do, is they do campy horror, and that's that's their niche, and they want to be the best of the best in that niche. And for me, it's like, maybe I want to do that. Maybe I want to do a thriller. Maybe I want to do an animated series. I have an animated series I'm doing that's very, very adult and inappropriate and raunchy, but I'm having a blast working on it.
So tell us about You Are My Home. That was your very first feature, correct? Tell us what that story is.
So that story is it's around Christmas time, so it is a Christmas themed movie. And an 11-year-old girl is separated from her mother by ICE because her mother had come over, illegally. And she's put in a foster care situation with a woman who had lost her husband and son very tragically about 5 years ago in a car accident. And at first, it's kind of like a Kramer versus Kramer situation where the two of them butt heads. They come from different worlds, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status. And but they form this friendship and this bond. And then it's kind of the woman thinks, what am I going to do when her mother comes back? I've actually really, really grown to love this kid.
And how does that, should I dare ask how that works out, or am I spoiling it?
I mean, it's been out long enough now, but it's unfortunately, the mother does try to come back, and she doesn't make it. She doesn't make it across the Rio Grande a second time. And so she does end up adopting the girl, and they end up, forming a family. So.
And what was it like for you to work on that first feature for you? Was it daunting? Were you nervous about it, or did you feel like you were in your element?
Oh gosh, I was nervous. It's my first feature, and it's like doing a short film. It's like a sprint. And, what I had learned is like doing a movie is a marathon. And it's, it's like you can, push yourself for 20 hours and not sleep and not do that for a couple of days prior to a short and during the filming. But, when you're working several weeks on a feature, it's like you really have to pace yourself, and you have to find time to rest and still have time to work. And, but yeah, I mean, overall, it's like I had a really, really good team that supported me. My DP was with me all the way, and, the crew worked really, really hard on that film. And I'm very grateful.
And I assume you came out of the back end of it feeling like you understood what you were doing and you were right to be doing it. It's your destiny to be doing this.
Absolutely. When I finished it, I was like, that's it, you know. And I remember I had told a friend of mine who's a horror director actually in Australia, and he said, "That's it, Amanda, you're one of us now." And that was just such a lovely feeling. That was just such a wonderful feeling. I was like, oh,
You're in the club.
because I had been his director's assistant on another movie, and he's like, "See, look where you are now." It's just very nice.
So you were talking about pacing yourself, which I find to be a very good comment, because when it is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and
Mhm.
they are long days, and all roads lead through you. Correct?
Yes. Yes. You set the temperature, you set the mood every single day. And it's like, and if you're in a bad mood or if you let something get to you, it's like that will trickle down into everyone. So you are the captain of the ship. And it's like you just can't let things get to you. You have to just kind of keep moving on and work through things, and stuff crops up and it's like, well, that location went away, or oh, we lost power here and moving on to this other thing. You just have to really, really be flexible.
So when you started to prep that first feature, how
Mhm.
much time did you take to prep the movie?
I didn't have a ton of time, unfortunately, because it was lower budget. But I did have a storyboarder that I worked with. So we did board the film. I spent, many days and times working with my DP. We went over the shot list and figured out what we wanted to do. Went over the storyboards. And it was in Texas, and I was based out of here. So I was only there. I did a couple of location scouts, but we were only there a couple of weeks prior to shooting, so it was not a lot of prep time.
Mhm.
But we did what we could.
And in doing that prep, did you find that you got into a rhythm that was helpful?
I think every day was a little bit different. There was like a different fire to put out, or different things in the schedule that needed your attention. But I felt pretty well prepped before we started shooting.
Mhm. My feeling on prep, just this is my own particular take, though I don't think it's unique to me at all, is that you are actually preparing to be able to punt when you need to. You alluded to that a little bit earlier, so
Yeah.
that you're prepared when things go south a little bit to make a pivot. Yes.
Yes. You're like, okay, well, this scene can't work because of that. It's like, okay, what else can we shoot? Oh, you know what we can do? We can grab this. Let's grab the inserts of this over here while we're setting this up while this camera's down. And you have to find that way to kind of work around it. Like, we're losing daylight. We're losing the daylight. Okay, I know this was 4 shots. This has to turn into a oneer. Let's make it work.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about that? Does it thrill you, or does it scare you?
I kind of enjoy the rush, I have to say. I mean, I don't say I love chaos. I mean, I like things to be structured and organized, but when something gets thrown, like a curveball gets thrown at you, I kind of like, okay, let's see if I can make this work. Let's do this.
All right, let's go back and talk about writing for a moment, because obviously you can't get to make a movie unless you have a script. At least
Mhm.
I've never heard of an improv movie that has ever succeeded, though I'm sure there's one or two out there, but I don't know of them. And you are a writer. I mean, you've been a writer for quite some time. You even
Yeah.
said that you started writing stories when you were a child. And so what I'm curious, when you are crafting a story, do you think of the audience? Are they part of the process of you developing the story, or are you trying to please just yourself while you're writing?
That depends. I think with the book, it was purely about just, this is a story I needed to tell. I know what I want. I know how I have to have it. This is just, it needs to come out of me.
Mhm.
And I definitely felt that way with My Favorite Girlfriend. And then it just turned out to be something commercial that people were really excited about. I think some of my other things, I think when I've tried to write something a little more commercial, that, then like, oh, people might like something like this. It hasn't necessarily worked out. I find just writing like what I'm into. And then, oh my goodness, there's other people out there that are into this too.
Mhm. Do you do a little bit of market research? Are you asking people if they are interested in X, Y, or Z story as you're working it out, or do you not pay attention to that at all?
No, not really. Not really. I will do some research, obviously, just to see if that story's already been told, or I will tell or pitch it to, my managers or different people I know in the industry. It's like,
Sure,
yeah, I'm
sure.
working on this script about X, Y, and Z. And it's just like, oh, kind of sounds like whatever. You should really watch that movie. I'm like, ooh, okay,
It, do
maybe
you,
not.
what are the big differences for you? I mean, they're obvious, I think, but I want to hear what you think are the differences between writing a novel and writing a screenplay. What are those fundamental differences for you?
Well, writing a book takes a lot longer.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
you're not gonna write a novel in 4.5 days, are you?
Right, right. It's just, well, it's the descriptions. It's like in scripts, your descriptions and setups and, you know, what the color of this curtain is or whatever it is unless it's super important to the story, you don't include that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Whereas obviously in a book, it's much more descriptive and flowerful, and you can have an entire page of just descriptions and them walking through the fields and the smells and the sounds and what flowers they see. And, you know, in a screenplay, it's like they tromp through the fields and land at, you know, it's just not as, you have to be really careful with like how much, you know, page space you use when you're
Mhm.
writing a screenplay.
And now that you've done a chunk of both, do you have
Mhm.
a preference, or do you like both?
Um, it's are different parts of your brain, I think, that you have to use. I mean, when you switch over to being a novelist, it's definitely, you're a different kind of writer. And when you're a screenplay, it's fast, it's go, 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 it's dialogue, it's this and that. And then I feel like when I'm writing a novel and I'm getting back into like the sequel to Sherlock, it's just kind of like you're taking your time. It's everything just feels a little slower, and it's very different. It's hard to describe.
Tell us about Son of Sherlock. I think earlier I might have made a mistake and said it's about a female Sherlock, but it's not. That's another
Yeah,
friend of ours, isn't it? That's Brooks Wachtel,
that's Brooks. Yeah, yeah.
Lady
Yeah,
Sherlock.
Son of Sherlock is about the I believe he's 11-year-old now. Yeah, when the story starts, son of Sherlock Holmes, who doesn't know he's the son of Sherlock Holmes. He's raised by a different family entirely. And then when he discovers his heritage, he spends the entire book finding out who was his mother, why was he erased from the pages of Sherlockian history, what was being covered up. There's a huge conspiracy with the monarchy. There's some references to Jack the Ripper in there. It's just a lot of fun, and I'm a huge Sherlockian, and so it's very, very true to the canon, and everything that I've written in there could in theory happen during the timelines of the original 56 stories.
Well, you know, some of those stories, I don't think all of them, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure some of those stories are now in the public domain.
They actually all are now.
So there you go. Are we going to
Yes.
see a Sherlock Holmes movie from you?
I would like to. A producer actually reached out to me not long ago and said, "Hey, could you turn Son of Sherlock into a feature?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Can you age him up?" Like, oh, it really messes with the timeline, but maybe. So
You know, if someone has not read the book, they won't know the difference. You will,
I know.
but
I would know. They wouldn't know.
but if
So
someone's read the book, it might tick them off.
right. So it's that's something that I'm like, well, like I have other things right now. Let's circle back on that a little bit. So
All right, so with a new script or with a new book, it doesn't matter. When you're starting a story and it's, you know, it's going to be a chunk. It's not a short story. It's going to be a long form of some kind. What do you tend to concentrate on first? Plot, character? What do you tend to concentrate on first?
for me, it's I need to know kind of where the story goes first. So it's like when I'm writing the outline, when I wrote the outline for My Favorite Girlfriend, when I did the first outline for this new dramedy that I'm writing, I kind of was thinking about, I'm like, okay, this is the character that I want. She's the lead character. This is the drama. This is the main catalyst that happens. And then where's the end? So I need to know what the end is, and then I can work out the rest of the stuff and kind of go backwards.
Oh, especially in a detective or a thriller, you really need to know
Yeah.
the end first, don't you?
Yes. Yep.
And so what are the big challenges of creating something of that nature, of a detective story or a thriller? Is it working out the plot details? What are the bigger, or is it working out the characters? What are the big challenges then?
When you're writing a mystery, I think it's really more about the plot points, because you have to be able to write enough that's so interwoven, and it's like this web of like, oh, this string is tied to this, and then this goes back to this, and that's so that when people go back and read, you know, if they enjoyed it, hopefully they want to read it a second time, like, oh, that's why that was there.
Right.
That's okay. That makes sense now.
Did you find when you were writing Son of Sherlock that you knew where you were going, but that as you started to write, things changed?
Yes. I mean, I knew the ending, and I knew I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. But then the story, it started a short story. And I had told my then boyfriend, he said, I'd love to read it. And I'm like, well, it's kind of turning into a novel. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. So it just kind of created this, it was this own thing. And then these characters would just come out and just, as a writer, I'm sure you know too, it's like the characters just start talking to you.
Yes.
You start writing the scene and like, no, why are you going there? Oh, you went there. But they tell you where they want you to go.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Once you figured that, when you get there, it's delightful, isn't it? Because things really just start to really flow when the characters are talking. I think it was the great Callie Corey who's famously wrote Thelma and Louise. I think, and I'm paraphrasing the quote, but she once said that she needed to find the quiet in order to hear the characters talking.
That makes a lot of sense.
doesn't it? Where you,
Yeah.
because if your mind is racing in a million different directions, it's really hard to hear those characters through the chatter in your head. So you
Yes.
have to find that place where you can kind of calm down and quiet down and hear what's happening.
Because you can be struggling with a scene or a plot point, and you just think, man, I just don't know how to get there. And then you'll be in the shower somewhere where it's very quiet and there's nothing else going on. You're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly. Yes, they're going to do that and that. And like, oh, that's going to be so good for her. So yeah,
Do you see scenes in your head as you're writing? Do you envision them?
Mm-hmm.
That's how it is for me too, and I don't think all writers are the same, but I think a lot of writers do exactly what you and I do, which is you actually, I say it to my students as I see it as a movie screen in my head, and then I become a reporter and I'm reporting what I see.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that does make sense.
You know what I'm saying?
The desk, you see where the door is, you see the spatial relationship between where the window is and when she's walking, and it's like, you know exactly how that is.
Well, and then you start to think about what are the elements in the room, in the whatever the scene is. If it's out in the field, what are the elements that are there that you can then use?
And it's like, oh, there's that paperweight she's going to pick up that's there on the left side of her. She's going to take that and chuck it at the door.
Exactly. Do you think of yourself having a very vivid imagination?
Oh, very much so. I was actually just having this conversation with the director. I'm working on this animated script this morning, and I was an only child, so I had to entertain myself. So I had little stuffed animals that I would talk to, and they would talk to each other and have these little conversations and these dialogues. And that's how I entertained myself. I could have a stack of rocks, and each rock had a personality. And like the white rock was like the queen rock, and it's like I could be left alone for hours, and I'm good.
I know that you have a proclivity toward fantasy, correct?
I do.
And I know that you were a fan of, I'm not trying to say anything wonderful about me, but you were a fan of Jekyll and Hyde before you and I ever met, right?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. I had the highlights album, and then I had the concept album, and man, I was in love with that thing.
So my point being that you were into science fiction, fantasy, Robert Louis Stevenson, those kinds of things, but you also are into romance, romantic comedy, and into a dramedy, as you say, which can have a sci-fi tilt to it, but usually doesn't. So you have a broad range of likes.
Like my dream in a perfect world, I would love to direct a James Bond movie, and I would love to direct a Star Wars movie.
Now you're not thinking of putting James Bond in outer space, are you?
Oh, good Lord, no.
He's already been there. We've already had James Bond in outer space. Do you have any advice to folks that are trying to figure this world out on pitching? How are you at pitching? Do you have any advice toward ways that you do it that would help people?
I mean, just it's you're selling yourself. It's like you're selling the story, but you're also selling yourself. It's like, is this a cool person I want to hang out with and spend hours and hours in a story room with? And it's like, are you excited? Are you into it? Do you have other ideas? Are you flexible? They're like, oh, well, what if this happened? And always have an answer. I mean, you can't have an answer to everything, but really, really be prepared and know your characters. And if they throw you a curveball and say, oh, well, why did she behave that way? What in her childhood made her want to do that? And if you're like, I don't know.
It's very helpful to have the answers to the questions before they're asked.
Yes.
And that's sometimes very difficult if you haven't really worked the story out very well yet.
Yeah. I would say, enthusiasm, slow down, because I know one thing I do is I tend to talk really fast when I'm excited.
Yes.
So I have to always remember to kind of like, all right, breathe. And
do people ever say to you, slow down?
Yes,
they do.
I was at DreamWorks and I was pitching this movie, and I was really amped up and stuff. I'm like, whoa, hold on, slow down. Like, I'm trying to keep up here.
I'm sorry. You exceeded their hearing ability. So I'm assuming that over time and the various projects you've done, both novelistically and filmically, that you've received notes from people, whether it was from a publisher, or whether it was from a producer or an actor or somebody who's giving you notes, their thoughts. How do you take notes? What is your philosophy toward taking notes?
I think I don't know if necessarily I'm in the norm, but I'm actually really good about taking notes, especially if they're smart notes. Because for me, it's like we're in, as a director, as a writer, we're all working towards the common goal of making something really amazing and something, that we're going to be proud of. And if they have an idea I haven't thought of, it's like, what if this character, even like this morning, the director was saying, like, well, what if this one person like makes the doll versus buying the doll? I'm like, oh, I really like that. That adds so much more of them that they're giving to this character. It's like, that's great. But there are some things that you push back on. It's like you take all notes with a grain of salt. And sometimes it's like, no, you know what? That is way out there. That's completely changing the story. And that's not the movie I want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And but with actors too, I mean, a lot of times actors, when they get invested and they know that you want to hear from them, like they can come up with some really amazing ideas and ad libs and different things. And I love that. I really like them to kind of be more an active participant.
All right, so let's flip that coin. What is your philosophy toward giving notes, like giving direction?
Always start with something complimentary, always find something in the script or the material that you can say like, hey, I really love this character, or like, that's a really cool concept I've never seen before, because it's just, we're all creatives. We all take things personally, even though they say not to. And it's hard. It's hard when people don't just say like what you wrote is like, this is the best thing ever, especially if you think, man, I knocked this out of the park. It's great. But then just, be constructive. There's never a reason to be mean to somebody and say like, oh, this is crap. Or like, I'd never watch this. It's just kind of like, hey, look, this is how you could make this better. Or there's some suggestions, or have you really thought about why this person's doing this the way that they are? Or, what are some other options? It's kind of like letting them maybe find like, oh, maybe I could try that, rather than just saying, you have to do this, you have to do that, because nobody likes to be told what to do.
So you're the anti-dictator. There are directors who are dictators, and there are directors who are trying to have some sort of a group experience, and there are directors who are trying to pull something out of someone rather than dictating, and you're of that latter group.
And like never give like a line reading. It's rather than saying like, you need to say it this way, it's like be a little more authoritative in how you're presenting it, and just really, really slow it down.
So what happens, you're on a set and you are working with an actor, this has got to have happened to you, and they're just not getting where you want to go. What do you do?
You'll try a different tactic entirely, and you'll just be like, you know what, let's just say it a different way. What if we did that? Or, you know what, how about you say it from behind the table, and then now you got to walk over and say it while you're walking. And then like that motion gives them a more sense of an urgency than what they were giving me just in the line reading.
Would something like that happen to screw up a setup?
Sometimes it might take off your DP, but but your job as a director is to get really solid performances and to have everything look good. And like the DP kind of has to be flexible and work with you. It's like, like, okay, you blocked it this way, but now the actors are all like, no, I think I'd walk over here, and then I'd sit down, and then I would go back there. It's like, well, we blocked it but it's like the way that they have it, you're looking at it and you're like, no, that makes sense. And I remember even seeing Bill Condon work when I was doing behind the scenes producing with Helen Mirren. And I thought like, oh man, he's got to have everything planned out. It goes exactly the way that he wants. And so she walks on the set and he's like, okay, you're going to come here and kind of do this. And she's like, well, no, I think I'd come and I'd sit down and take off my shoes first. And then he's like, yeah, do that. And so I was like, okay, so not everybody has it totally figured out.
Well, who is going to tell Helen Mirren no? So, all right, you alluded to earlier that you storyboarded your first movie. Did you?
My first feature, my first short, I storyboarded entirely on my own. I went back and looked at it. I did shoot it shot for shot.
You hand drew it yourself?
I did, yeah.
And not in a computer program. You actually drew it on paper.
I did, yeah.
And are you an artist as well?
I wanted to be a Disney animator before I wanted to be
Really?
an actor or a director. So yeah, I've always been drawing.
So that's helpful, isn't it?
It is.
So that also leads me to then understand why you're such a visual person. You're seeing scenes in your head, you're seeing characters in various perspectives. All those things are very helpful for a director to have as a tool in their kit of tools. When you make a storyboard, what is your goal? Are you trying to literally recreate or create the movie on paper, or are you just trying to give yourself a sense of things?
More of a sense of things, because if I were to truly storyboard it completely shot for shot, I mean, it's incredibly time consuming, especially if it's just two people sitting down having coffee. It's like, you'd have like, the wide and like the over and the over. And it's like, do you have to keep cutting back throughout the whole scene? It's like, okay, I've got those three. Those are the three shots that I need. I'm not going to keep, each shot in the entire movie, go back to this, back to that. And just the ones that are also really important, because sometimes it's like, yeah, I know what that looks like. I want a down shot. Okay, what kind of a down shot? How far? Is it completely overhead? Is it more to the side? If that things I have to be specific with for my DP, then I will do that.
So just to clarify for the listeners who may not know, when you say wide and over, you're talking about the wide shot on the scene that sort of sets the whole place. It gives us a sense of where we are. And then you're over the shoulder of one actor and over the shoulder of another actor in order for us to see the characters from their perspectives.
Yes.
You've been around other directors and on other sets. You've been acted yourself. You have worked around other directors, as you said, Bill Condon and so on. What lessons would you say, or what great lesson have you ever learned from a director that you now apply in your directing?
I think the best piece of advice I ever got was from Mike Gabriel, and Mike Gabriel directed Rescuers Down Under and Pocahontas, and he did the short Lorenzo for Disney. And I was asking him, as he's a friend and a mentor of mine, I was saying, hey, I'm going to do my short film. I said, I'm really nervous, and I haven't directed before. And, what would you would say to a first-time director? And he said, always have an answer. Doesn't have to be the right answer, but you have to have an answer. Really, he said, you are the captain of the ship. And if they come to you, it's like, do you want blue or red? It's like blue. And then you can always go back and see both of them on the wall and be like, you know what, actually that kind of meshes with that. Let's go with the red. He says, but the minute you show hesitation, or the minute you don't seem like you don't know what you want, then people start to question your authority. Interesting. He says, so, it doesn't have to be the right answer, but just never not have an answer.
Never not have an answer. That's a very good answer, which you had. That is a lesson that you have then applied. You've gone on to each of your productions as a director, and you were prepared to answer every question that was coming.
Yeah, and just don't be afraid of it. If someone says like, oh, we're figuring this out and stuff, and like, do you think you want like this kind of chair or that kind of chair? And it's like, and you get more used to that, and knowing and always keeping that in mind. I'm like, yeah, I want that one. Well, don't you think this one would be better? I'm like, nope, I want that one. Okay. And you see it in there, you're like, yeah, that looks good. All right.
you get them to see it your way.
Yeah.
As a salesman once said to me, the way that you get someone to buy something is that you just basically say to them in various ways, be reasonable, see it my way. You're trying to get someone to come over to your side of things. What is your philosophy toward casting? How important is casting to making a movie?
Oh, it's so important. It is so important. It's hard as a director, because I'm a director and a producer. So I understand the importance of needing names, and this person carries this much weight in foreign sales. And, because for me, it's like, I just want the best actor for the job. If I look at 10 actors and this one's like, that's exactly how I see them, but they have no credits, and they're the lead, I'm not going to get to cast them, unfortunately. But it is really, really important for the director to be very hands-on involved. And for me, even down to like the smallest, like 3-line thing, I'm involved. I want to see this person read. I want to see, what they look like. It's, there are no small roles. It's like, do you need to see this, background person? I'm like, yep. Yes, I do.
So you have both been a person who's auditioning, and you've been on the other side of the table as the person watching auditions.
Yeah.
What would you say, from your experience, are things that actors do that don't help them get parts, and what are things that actors do that help them get the part?
First of all, just, we want you to succeed. When you're the director and you're auditioning, it's like, I want you to come in and blow me away. And I know the nervousness is like, oh, I'm not going to be good enough for that. And like, no, it's like, I want you to impress me. I really want you to be good. It's like, that's what I'm hoping for, that I can end the day. You can come in, blow me away. I got my person. I'm done. I don't want to have to spend 6 hours looking for somebody. It's like, you like to see other options, but still. And the things that I think bother me are when it's like they're auditioning for one role and there's a line in there and it's like, oh, they wore that particular sweater that's mentioned in the script that has this character or this thing on it. And to me, that's just trying too hard. It honestly, everyone's different. Some people may be like, yeah, they made the effort, but to me, it just feels like I don't really care what you're wearing. I want to see what you can do. I want to look at your eyes.
Does it feel phony does it feel phony in some way to you?
Yeah, it does.
It feels like they're pushing the envelope a little too hard.
Yeah, it's like I'm wow me with your performance, not your wardrobe.
Well, unfortunately, there are a few actors out there who are better in their wardrobe than they are in their performances. So thank goodness there are not very many of those, because I love actors, and so many great actors in our world today. That is a sure thing. Do you like to do rehearsals before you shoot?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you like to rehearse before production or just on set?
If I'm given the opportunity, the time and the actors are willing to do it, I 100% want to do that. We did that on My Favorite Girlfriend, and we went through all the scenes with my lead actors. And we sat down and we talked through it, and then when we got on set, it felt so much more comfortable for them, and they already had this great relationship and this connection between the two of them that we got through rehearsal. So I find it invaluable if you can do it. Now, everyone has time or have actors that have the ability prior to shooting, but if you can, do it.
Or sometimes the budget for it.
Exactly.
Because you got to pay people to do that, and sometimes there's no budget for it, and that can be a whole different thing. What would you say is the most fulfilling thing for you as being a director? What fulfills you the most?
Fulfills me the most, I think, after you've worked in a scene, you've worked so hard to get the production design away, the wardrobe, you've gone through all the stuff in prep and pre-production and rehearsals. And then when you're watching that scene come to life and you're seeing those words that you wrote being performed, and sometimes it's like you just get so lost in the performance, and then they stop and you're like, cut? Oh yeah, okay. You get so sucked in by like, wow, that was great.
On your first movie, did you at any point forget to say action or cut?
Oh, I'm sure I did.
You're so caught up in it, you forget that you're actually the person that has to say that word.
Yes.
Or words.
Are we gonna cut? Are we gonna cut? Because like they would still be like at it, like going, and I'm just like watching. I'm like, oh, this is really good. Okay.
So you have, prior to either production or day of shooting, you have worked out, as you said, some kind of a shot list with your director of photography. So going into the day, it's not, people have a job. This is the job we're going to do. This is the goal, and this is how we're going to try and do it. But when you're creating that shot list, do you come to that pretty much with all of your thoughts of what the scene should look like in your head, or are you working that out with the DP in collaboration?
Working out with the DP in collaboration, because again, I like all parts of this to be collaborative, and it's kind of like, okay, I saw it kind of like this, and then this happens. It's like, oh, what if we had the shot where they're coming around and then they do the little thing and it sticks like the flower things on the hands, and we see it from the other side of the frame. And I was like, oh yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. Yeah, let's do that. So like, I want them to feel that it's not just my way or the highway. Like I do want them to contribute and plus whatever I'm giving.
Do you come to it with a pretty strong notion already in mind, and then you're open to their thoughts, or are you coming to it with an open mindset before you even get there?
It depends. There are some scenes that I definitely have an opinion on, or there are some like, I really, really want it this way. And there are some things like, I'm kind of open on this. I have a rough idea. There's a couple shots in here I know that I want, but outside of that, like, let's talk about it.
Were there moments in production so far in any of your productions where you, the writer, had to be removed from the process by you, the director?
Yeah, I would say, it's like a lot of times I had to kick the writer off set. So
because why? Can you give us an example of something that happened that way?
I'm trying to think. Some locations had to be changed in my second movie that we weren't able to get. And so that had to change the scene and some of the dialogue. And so I had to work with that.
And that frustrated the writer.
Yes.
But the director had to be practical. The director had to be practical. That's the thing about making movies, and you correct me, please, if you're looking at this differently. But to me, making movies is one long series of compromises.
It is.
You're constantly being forced to think about what it is you want to do versus what you're actually able to do.
Like there was one scene that I had written in You Are My Home, and it was supposed to take place at a Christmas tree farm. Well, they weren't able to get me a Christmas tree farm. So it ended up being in a lobby of a church, and he was decorating a Christmas tree. And so that kind of, but it was a walk and talk scene. They went around the trees and the kids were running around, and there was all this different stuff that was happening, while this, 3.5-page scene was going on. And then it's like, you're there. I'm just kind of like, there's not a whole lot I can do in this space. And we kind of was like, do we really need this page? And I was looking at it. I was like, you know what? It's gone. Cut it. It's fine.
Wow.
Take it out.
That's
like,
bold.
really? I'm like, yep, out. I ripped it out of my script. I'm like, okay, we're not saying any of that.
Did
you? Well, maybe just this one line. I was like, yeah, you can put that one line back in, but otherwise we'll trim the scene.
Did you regret it later, or did it work out fine?
It worked out great.
I'm curious, when you're on set, sets can be incredibly distracting places. There's a lot of activity going on. There's a lot of hubbub. And as I said earlier, all roads lead through you, the director. Everything's coming to you in the midst of somewhat organized chaos.
Yes.
Is that an accurate way of proposing it?
Yeah. And it's a lot of hurry up and wait, because, you'll finish a scene and then it's like you're moving on to the next, and you're talking with your actors or whoever it is about the next scene. And then everyone's like relighting and setting things. And, then a lot of it's like, okay, I'm going to go back and look over my script pages and work on this. And, they'll let me know when I have something to come look at.
So you find that you always have something to do and you remain focused in that way? Or have you ever had experiences where it's so distracting that you didn't know how to get focus?
No, I'm actually really good. I write a lot in coffee shops too, because I'm really good at tuning everything out around me. So if I need to sit there and work with my actors on script pages, or if I'm realizing I need to rewrite a scene for the next scene because something just changed or they ad-lib something, I'm like, oh, I need to put that into the next thing. Then I am completely focused, and they'll have to literally tap me on the shoulder like, Amanda, I'm like, what? Okay, time to go.
Well, I would say that's a really great skill set to have, that you're able to stay that tunnel vision, because it can be difficult when there's a lot of stuff flying around you at the same time. You can lose focus fairly easily if you're not as disciplined as you say, in terms of keeping focus like that. What would you say are any tricks or tips you might have for raising money to make these things?
Oh, goodness.
The $64,000 question.
Raising finance for films is always difficult, because anybody else that will invest in real estate or restaurants, whatever, it's a much more sure bet. No one's guaranteed anything in investing in film. It's usually they have to, I would say, with like investors, always be honest and say, like, you only can put in money that you think you can lose. Because, if this is like your life savings and you think you're going to, hit the jackpot and make, $10 billion on the sales of this, and like, that's how you feed your family or whatever, it's like, I'm not taking your money. It's just, it's explained to them the risks. It's getting them excited about it. It's really, there's no right or wrong way to do it. And it is a very, very complicated step in all of it.
Well, part. Unfortunately, making a movie is not just labor intensive, but it's financially intensive. It's very hard to make any of these for little to nothing, though it can be done, and more so today with the technology that we have in cameras, especially. But have you raised the financing for your two movies yourself, or did you go to get somebody to help you do that?
I brought in about the third of the finance for the first film, as far as post funds and such. And then for the second film, I brought in about 2/3 of the finance through two different investors. Yeah.
And then were you instrumental in raising the rest with those folks, or did somebody else do it for you?
My producing partner on my second film, he had brought in two additional producers that had completed the financing for that film, for My Favorite Girlfriend.
And they were raising money from various individuals or from single entities, from one big entity like a studio?
One of them had a deal with any movie that he wanted to invest in. His producing partner would put in X amount of dollars. And then the other one had some connections that he had brought in to kind of piecemeal that, from people he knew, and brought that in. So it was very much like this person, that person. And like the two biggest sources of income from like the pot, were the two people that I had initially, and then they brought in the rest to finish the budget.
So let me be clear for the listeners. You, as Amanda has done, you clearly must have skill sets in the arts, in being able to write, in being able to communicate with people in a clear way that gets them to do what you want them to do. And on top of it, you have to be a salesperson, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so you have to have all those skill sets. You don't get to get away with, just one. You don't get to just be the artist.
We all have to wear multiple hats.
Multiple hats. And obviously you're very good at putting on many hats. So, more power to you. So I've been speaking to Amanda Raymond for almost an hour now, and we're going to wind this thing down a little bit. And I'm just curious, in all of your many experiences in this business, this crazy business of ours, I'm wondering if you are able to share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, strange, oddball, or just plain funny.
Well, I have one that's funny. It's maybe not totally inappropriate for younger listeners if we have them, but I think
so cover your ears, kids.
My most Hollywood story ever, and I don't think anything like this would ever happen again, just because of the nature of things in the business and the whole Me Too era, whatever. But my ex had been working on a project with Robert Evans, and it was called The Hip Hop Godfather. It was going to be an animated movie. Horrible idea, but it was his chance to work with Evans. And he said, you was always in a better mood when I was there. So I was over at Woodland, which is Robert Evans' big estate. And we were in Robert Evans' bedroom, and he was going over the storyboards and panels and such. And then he gets a call on the phone, and he said, yeah, get your ass over here. It's like, what? It's like, Warren Beatty's coming over. I was like, Dick Tracy? I was so excited. So Warren Beatty comes over. He's like, oh no, I didn't know you guys had companies. Like I can come back. And he's like, no, we're just working. And they started talking, and it was just really kind of surreal to me. And he said, oh, you work at Disney? And I worked at Disney at the time. And he said, I have this idea for, a kid's animated show. I was like, oh yeah? And he's like, great. Well, you should meet up. Now I'm interested in you in just a lascivious one. And I was like, oh, great. That's great. Thanks. And, and then I started talking about how Robert Towne had his wedding there at one point. And, like, oh yeah, you remember so-and-so? And yeah. And I'm like, oh gosh. I said, what's the story about so-and-so? And I said, okay, so there was this woman that Warren Beatty really liked. She had a big, almost like Audrey Hepburn hat on, like My Fair Lady, very prim and proper, the way she was seated. And Warren thought she was really cute. So he went over to her and sat next to her and he's like, hey, so what do you do? She said, oh, I'm a porn star. He's like, oh, very funny. So he goes to Robert Evans and said, okay, what's that girl's story? And he starts laughing and he says, she's a porn star. And he's like, oh, you're so full of it, man. So, because they all know he has a reputation, they all would rag on each other and make fun of each other. And so he goes to Robert Towne and he said, okay, so what's that girl's story? He says, and he starts laughing. He says, oh, she's a porn star. He's like, are you all in on this? Did you know she was the one I was going to be after? That's hilarious. And he says, oh, no, it's real. So at the wedding, Robert had brought him into the house and he showed him this tape and put it in, and it was that girl and it was a porno. So he's like, so it was true. And so Evan says, so I still have that tape. It's like, uh-oh. So he calls in Alan, his butler, this is British guy. And so Alan comes like, Alan, get the tape. I'm like, what's happening? So the next thing I know, Alan brings in the tape. They put it in the VCR in Robert Evans' bedroom. They put it in and they're watching it. Like, that's the girl. I'm like slinking further and further into my chair. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Robert Evans is showing you a porno in his bedroom?
Yes.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then thank God Beatty of all people is the one that says, you know what, turn that shit off. It wasn't sexy then, it wasn't sexy now. I was like, do you want to get a pizza? So we ended up going to Jacobo's Pizza, which is no longer there in Beverly Hills. And Annette couldn't make it because she was, I guess, already tired. But it was just one of those really surreal moments that I thought, wow, this is Hollywood. It's my first year out here. And it was just crazy.
You're telling me that you got to watch a porno in Robert Evans' bedroom with Warren Beatty?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. You might enjoy, I just finished reading a really good book called The Big Goodbye that involves the making of Chinatown, and Evans is all through it. It's really a great book by a fine writer named Sam Wasson. You might enjoy it. It's very,
I'll have to check that out.
Very instrumental in how Hollywood worked, no longer does.
I had to watch The Offer just because Robert Evans was in. I thought Matthew Good nailed him. Like, I knew Evans. That was Evans.
Well, that's a great story. Last question for you today, Amanda. You've already given us a ton of great tips and advice, but I'm wondering if you have one single solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are just trying to get into the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to that next level.
One thing I would say, like, no matter how high up you get the chain, one, it's always be good to people, because the same people you see on your way up, you'll see on the way down. So there's never a reason to not be nice and decent to people. no matter what the lowliest of the low PAs, is treat them all with respect. And then the other thing I would say is never think you're too good for a job, because sometimes like you're the director and you have to move that table on your own, or just something comes up, or, I wanted to help a friend out in a film because I was in between stuff. And he's like, oh, do you mind just, slating or doing this or what have you? And, he ended up just giving me an associate producer credit because I was doing everything and just helping out and just being there to be supportive. And I had a great time. And the producers were so impressed with me. They actually have hired me to direct another movie.
Wow. Well,
for being there.
That's astonishingly great advice. And I think that's anybody listening to this should take that to heart, because the truth is, on top of everything else, you probably learned a ton at the same time.
Absolutely.
You're always going to learn something new from somebody that you'd never thought would teach you something. And that's just great advice. Take the gig, especially when you're starting out.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But maybe not a porn.
Yeah. I would steer away from that as much as possible, because that does haunt you. But not that I've ever done it, but I've heard. So.
Well, Amanda Raymond, this has been just a fun, action-packed hour on StoryBeat today, and I'm so delighted that you spent some time with us. And I wish you very well in your burgeoning career. Well,
thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.